Welcome into another edition of Tide and Tiger, the podcast 48 hours after the Iron Bowl. For Auburn fans, it was terrific. For Alabama fans, not so much, as they have to wait the fate of others to try to get into the college football playoff. Hello, everybody. Scott Griffin here, along with Rodney Orr of Tider Insider. Rodney, what's happening?
What's happening? What do you think's happening? It's chaos in Tuscaloosa. No. I'm kidding. Amongst the fans on Tider Insider, of course, it's they have a difficult time with this game, obviously, and have had and are still having, as you mentioned, 48 hours later, creating a lot of discussion, a lot of questions on the Iron Bowl that we just saw where Auburn clearly handled Alabama.
And that's why I like to wait 48 hours, why we're putting this podcast out now instead of the day after or the night of, because I like to sit and think and ponder. Now, we're going to go through a bunch of points here, yours and my thoughts, and people can react to them how they want. But let's just start with a general overview of the football game and what you saw.
Well, I mean, we don't see that very often. And what I mean by that is this Alabama team made a lot of mistakes. I mean, clearly, first of all, I'd give credit to Auburn because, as Bryant used to say, they out everythinged Alabama in that particular game. There was really not any area that they did not win the battles, so to speak. And I just think that when you look at this and see some of the mistakes that Alabama made, I mean, you're talking about taking a delay a game when you're sitting at the Auburn 12-yard line with a 3rd and 4. You talk about some of the miscommunication on the snaps later in the game that hurt Alabama. You talk about the field goal that was botched. These things were just a few of the mistakes that we saw Alabama make that you very, very rarely see from a Nick Saban football team. So I think all of those things, Scott, certainly raise your eyebrows, make you think, what exactly happened here? And I think when you look at this game, that is a question that you ask. But also you go back to, how often do you see a Nick Saban football team get handled the way this team was handled? And, I mean, I think that's fair to say. Don't know that they were completely dominated. I wouldn't say that. But you have to say that Auburn certainly was a team that had control of the game pretty much from the start to the finish. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of question maybe in the third quarter when Alabama came out, and we're going to talk about that drive, and ran the football basically down Auburn's throat, and then kind of abandoned that way of doing things. Maybe that was a point where, Alabama was playing pretty even with them, but there was never a real threat where Alabama was ever even remotely in control.
But go back and look at the play chart. I would disagree that Alabama abandoned the run after that series. You go back to the following series after Alabama had taken their initial possession in for a touchdown in the second half, which, like you said, was a dominant performance right there in the running game. But they came back the next series, ran it on 1st and 2nd down, and faced a 3rd and 5 and did not convert. They continued to try to run the ball, but Auburn, on the flip side, took it in for a couple of scores, and all of a sudden Alabama's down, forces your hand a little bit to throw the ball. So I think that
here's where I would stop you there. Hurts, now this is the end of the game, and stats can be misleading, as you know. Hurts has 17 carries. All the backs have 18. That balance is too much quarterback heavy. You'd agree?
Well, he carried it 51 times, I think it was, over a 3-game period, which would be MSU, LSU, or Mississippi State, for those who did not get that. But Mississippi State, LSU, and Auburn, that's 51 carries that I think probably could have been divvied up a little bit more. But now listen, when you run the zone read, some of those plays are, they're not necessarily designed quarterback runs. They're reads. So he's going to carry the ball based on what he sees. Some of those runs I think are probably going to be scrambles, obviously. And then some of them are designed runs where he did, keep the ball around the edge, or maybe had a quarterback draw or two mixed in. So I don't think all of those runs were designed runs. I think some of it was the way it was read, and some of it was just simply the way it played out in terms of him pulling it down and running it. So yeah, he did get in terms of quarterback heavy running. I think that is certainly something that a lot of people have asked. Now, we'll say this too, while we're talking about the Alabama offense. I still say that the key is the third downs. I mean, Alabama was 3 of 11 on third downs offensively. It all ties in together. Obviously, Alabama struggled on the defensive side, trying to get off the field. But overall defensively, Scott, I'm kind of jumping around here, but overall defensively, Alabama held Auburn to 26 points. And not that that's necessarily bad, but in terms of, scoring, that's giving up more than that's 16 more than what Alabama was averaging giving up. But at the same time, you hold that offense to 26 points, I still think you've got a good chance to win the game. It goes back to me as Alabama offensively has struggled to score points against good defenses. They've struggled to throw the ball against good defenses. They've struggled on third downs against good defenses. And to me, I'm not putting all the blame on the offense, but I think, you can't put all the blame on the defense either. And that's what Alabama fans have a tendency to do. Everything that happens, it's the defense's fault. And I just think that that's really, that's a mode of thinking that I think is years past. I mean, you've got to be able to score points in some of these games and be successful throwing the football against some of these defenses to win these games. I think we've seen it time and time again, have we not?
Yeah, we have. And let's take one thing at a time. Let's get back to Jalen Hurts. And I agree, the read option, the zone read, whatever you want to call it, certainly he does some of that. But there's also, look, if that's the case, he's a very, very good running quarterback. We know that.
Right. Excellent.
But he's not as good a runner as Damian Harris, Bo Scarborough, et cetera. Okay? So if you're going to run that play, you need to run, if I remember correctly, in the third quarter drive where they drove down the field, there weren't many, if any, zone reads. They were straight handoffs, okay, to Damian Harris or whoever. They had some stretch plays and different things. So my point is, take the ball out of his hands on the zone read and put it in the hands of your better running backs. To me, it is absolutely inexcusable. And I love Brian Daboll's offense. I think he's running he's trying to find his offense and have it complement Jalen Hurts, and we'll get into that in a moment. But it's incomprehensible to me that Damian Harris averages less than 10 carries a game. And Bo Scarborough, if you say, well, Bo Scarborough's getting carries, well, he averages less than 10. So that means your top two running backs, major NFL talent, is averaging about 18 carries a game. That's not enough if you're Alabama, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think then you throw Hurts in there, and, of course, you're talking about pure running back carries. So, I think that obviously that's a great question. I mean, when you have those two backs, they all year long, pretty much the carries have been limited. And, in this game, obviously, that drive to begin the second half, I agree with everything you're saying in regard to, the handoffs. They were called handoffs.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of Alabama fans have been pointing out.
So let's go deeper. It's my opinion. You've got I think a very good coordinator here. They involved the tight ends. The tight ends had 6 touchdown catches this year. I would argue that's probably the most they've had in many, many years. I haven't looked it up, but many years from the tight end position. Different guys got the ball. I was pleased with that. But I think trying to fit Jalen Hurts into what Brian Daboll wants to do is not a good fit. For Lane Kiffin, it worked. For Brian Daboll, it does not work as well. There's just – and Jalen's improved. He's improved his passing, but he's not, like you said, they struggled against good teams, and Auburn really didn't stop the run, and they still struggled. If Alabama gets down to a double-digit deficit like they did, it's trouble. The fact that we don't bring it up is because they don't ever get that way. But when they do, they could have played another quarter and a half, and Alabama wasn't going to come back from a double-digit lead in that game the way they were playing. You agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their downfield passing game, I mean, is obviously it's lacked for whatever reasons. I do think that it's important to, when you have this kind of offense, I think when you have these kind of receivers, you have these kind of tight ends, you've got to be able to have success standing in the pocket, reading the defense, maybe knowing before the snap exactly where you're going to go with the ball, but being able to stand in the pocket, read, go from 1, 2, 3, make throws, find receivers all over the field. I think they have those kind of receivers. I think they have that kind of potential. I just don't think it was, sometimes it was the offensive line, protection, whatever it might have been.
No doubt.
So you can't really say it was one particular area. But it's clear. It's nothing wrong. It's not a criticism to say that it's not been a strength of Jalen Hurts to stand in the pocket. Has he gotten better at standing in the pocket and delivering some throws? Yes, he has. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But
is it good enough? Is the question, right? Is it good enough?
I still think against a high-quality defense that sometimes that improvement is not enough. I think you have to be able to stand in there, make those reads and deliver those throws. I think Alabama can potentially do that, but they haven't been successful at that against the top defenses this season or at the end of last season. So, I don't know exactly what the answer is to all that, but I do think that they need to get better at it.
Look, here's some numbers they're going to throw out, and I'll argue with him. Jalen, 60% completion, okay? Good efficiency, 1,940 yards, not a lot of yards, 15 touchdowns, 12 games, only 15 touchdowns. That's a problem to me because that means you're really not calling plays for him to throw in the red zone. Alabama was good, 71% for the year in the red zone, scoring touchdowns, but only 15 touchdowns for him, and a lot of those were long ones. But here's what I want to point out. That's on 223 attempts, Rodney. Tua Tagovailoa has 8 touchdowns on 53 attempts. Okay? So he's got half the touchdowns on 25% of the throws. If you put Tua's numbers with Jalen, he would have 32 touchdowns throwing. Now, I know that's an inexact science. They're playing at different times, but still, I don't think that's something you can just laugh off as that's backup numbers.
Well, first of all, I would say what you're saying is those are inexact because, there are different situations that those two guys are playing in. And, I think it's very difficult to predict or to, come to some conclusions on what statistics might be. I understand exactly what you're doing, but I will say this, if you want to talk about Tua, I think he's a very talented guy. I think, I've said repeatedly that I think he's as talented of a passer, he's gifted of a passer as I've ever seen at Alabama. I've been following since the late 60s. Of course, I didn't see, Joe Namath when he was here. Obviously watched him in the NFL, but did not see him when he was at Alabama. But I don't think there's any doubt that this Tua Tagovailoa certainly has as much ability throwing the football as anybody I've ever seen at Alabama. And I think potentially he's an outstanding player. Again, I hate to get into the comparisons of what he might have done this year had he been given any more opportunity because, that's just nothing but speculation. If you want to move forward, though, I would say this. I would say, and I'm not Nick Saban. He knows a lot more about it than I do. So this is just an opinion, and it's certainly worth something to discuss because that's what we do. Nothing wrong with that. So I would say this, as you move forward, and you want to give your team the best opportunity to be successful, and you want to give every player on your team an opportunity to compete, the question is, how much of an opportunity are you going to give Tua Tagovailoa to legitimately compete for the job? I think he's good enough that he deserves that opportunity, and I think Nick Saban has always preached about competition and playing the best guy. And I think that he will give him an opportunity to compete for the job. I think he's got to, really, because this guy's, he's a fantastic talent. I think he can bring a lot to the offense. If he doesn't beat out Jalen Hurts in a fair competition or legitimate competition, then he doesn't beat him out. But I think for your team, for your program, I think it's certainly important to give him that opportunity.
Jalen Hurts is not going to go to the NFL after his junior year. Tua Tagovailoa is not going to hang around to play 1 year at Alabama. So I agree with you. It needs to be open for competition. Let the best man win, because Alabama fans will talk about judging themselves on championships. This is 2 years where you haven't won a national championship. You're in the national championship game, no doubt, but this year you got to wait on somebody else to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and you said championships, and I think a lot of people say, well, you've got a quarterback here that's 24-2 as a starter. I don't think anybody's disrespecting what he's done in terms of his contributions during all those wins, because he certainly made some fantastic plays, big plays that's helped Alabama win some games. I don't think there's any question about that. 24-2 is, as a quarterback, though, is not 24-2 as a baseball pitcher. You know that. I mean, it's a little bit different. You've got a lot of teammates, obviously, and in baseball too, but still, a pitcher can dominate a game all by himself with his talent. But I think when you look, Scott, at he's played on some teams that's had some really good defense, so he's been a beneficiary of that as well. So the 24-2 record doesn't really, to me, that's not an individual record. That's a team deal.
I agree.
No, I just think you have to look forward and say, okay, what is going to give? What do we have to do to continue to play and to have the same kind of success? What's going to give us the best opportunity to do that? And I'm not saying the quarterback change is that. I'm just saying that I think that with a quarterback like Tua Tagovailoa, I would certainly think that you would give him an opportunity to compete.
Let me shoot holes, because I'm tired of the 24-2 record too. Because if you take that in consideration, it's interesting to me that a starting quarterback gets all that credit and only plays one side of the ball. This isn't basketball. You're not playing defense.
Right.
He's not playing special teams. So how does the quarterback get all that credit for 24-2? And if you take that in consideration, then I would argue, okay, so you're telling me Jay Barker is better than A.J. McCarron. You're telling me that Case Keenum of the Minnesota Vikings, since they're 9-2, is better than Dak Prescott and Matthew Stafford at quarterback. You're telling me T. Martin is better than Peyton Manning because he won a national championship and lost less games. I mean, Rodney, that argument of Jalen is 24-2, I agree with you. That's not even, if you understand football, that's not even an accurate stat. Certainly you want a winner at quarterback, but that's very overstated.
Yeah, and clearly, let's be honest about it. He's helped them win some games.
No
That's
doubt.
not the point.
No doubt.
That's not the point. But it is a team thing. And like I said, if you want to look at it, every quarterback under Nick Saban's a winner. That's just a fact. I mean, you look at him since he's been here. Greg McElroy lost he was undefeated his first year. He lost 3 games his second year. So, he ended up 24-3. That's a great record. I mean, Jalen's 24-2 now,
yeah.
So that's very comparable. Obviously, A.J. McCarron had an incredible record, won in the mid-30s. So he was very successful. Jake Coker started 1 year and was 14-0 in that season. So obviously, I think that all of these guys have great records as a starting quarterback. You would expect them to have a great record as a starting quarterback at Alabama because the teams are so successful. I don't think it really necessarily means that the quarterback or is reflective as an individual stat for the quarterback.
I agree with you. I think that's the most overstated thing you throw out. It's very lame. All right, let's go to wide receiver distribution. Calvin Ridley, 55 catches. He only had 3 touchdowns, okay? But you add up all the other wide receivers, only 54 total catches. I think there's a problem getting the ball to wideouts other than Calvin Ridley. Not that they were predictable, and I know what people will say, well, they're only freshmen. But as you know, Rodney, those freshmen played a lot of minutes. They were regulars in the rotation.
Well, yeah, and if you look at Ridley's stats in 2015, I think he had 89 catches. That's just a true freshman, okay?
Yeah.
89 catches as a true freshman on the national championship team. Then last year, everybody talked about how his statistics dropped. I think he ended up with 72 catches, which really wasn't, a bad year. Now, he may end up matching that. I don't know. It depends on how many more games they play. I mean, obviously, he won't match that if they only play in a bowl game.
Right.
But obviously had the benefit those first 2 years of playing in the SEC championship game as well to kind of bolster those stats. But his numbers have dropped again this year.
It's less than 5 catches a game. If you're a stud receiver, you got to be getting 5 catches a game, right?
His numbers have dropped again, and I agree with you. I don't think the ball's been distributed around as much as maybe you would hope. And I think that Brian Daboll's offense, we talked about this, before the season started, that one of the things of his offense was you were going to see a lot of diversity. You were going to see the ball spread around. You were going to see a lot of receivers involved catching passes. You were going to see the tight ends involved, which we've seen more of that. You were going to see the running backs involved more as receivers. So all of those things, I still say people, and we're kind of switching gears here, there's a lot of people who are pointing the finger at Brian Daboll right now, but I kind of disagree with that. I go back to what you said earlier. I think for Brian Daboll right now, he's trying to mesh 2 systems, in my opinion. I think the things that he was hired, if you hire a guy like Brian Daboll, you've got to be thinking, well, the train of thought is we're going to do what, he knows what he does. And coming from the Patriots, obviously it's not zone read. No. So I think they're trying to utilize Jalen Hurts' strengths as what he does, and also implement the things that Brian Daboll does. And so they're trying to mix the two. And right now, as you mentioned earlier, I think, I don't think that's so far been the key in terms of having any success against some of these better defenses.
So this is a crossroads to me for not Alabama football, but for and I tweeted this out yesterday, for the Alabama quarterback position, which is very important to Alabama football. You've hired a guy. You've got a guy that was SEC Offensive Player of the Year. He's taken a step back. You've got a backup that's really good, really good. He has shown every flash, and everybody has talked about how really good he is. Are you open to the idea of an open competition, or are you stuck with Jalen Hurts? Because if you're stuck with Jalen Hurts, you will lose Tua Tagovailoa, and then you might lose any other passer once Jalen Hurts is gone in the foreseeable future. Let's just put it this way. People will use that in recruiting. You follow it as well as anybody.
Well, yeah, I think they did last year. I think several schools tried to use it with Jerry Jeudy and also with Henry Ruggs, the Alabama's pass game. Of course, last year, you certainly had, you could say, well, and listen, Jalen Hurts did a fantastic job. He was SEC Offensive Player of the Year in terms of offense. But so, it's not being critical of him, but they did point out some of the deficiencies in the passing game to some of those young receivers that were being recruited. So I think, it could certainly be used against you in recruiting. I think they will try to do that. But, I do agree with you in terms of the way you defined it as a crossroads. I think it is. I think anytime you lose to your arch rival after you've beat them 3 years in a row and they kind of handle you the way they did, and you look at it, and the difference to me, again, I say this, there's a lot of keys in the game. Can't just say one thing, but I do think the big difference in the game was the quarterback play. I think Jarrett Stidham, if you look compared to last year, the difference in the game, the difference in the 2 Auburn teams was Jarrett Stidham. I mean, if they had played this game on Saturday with Sean White at quarterback, Alabama would have probably won by 2 or 3 touchdowns.
I agree.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. Jarrett Stidham made the difference because he could throw the ball. Now, he made some nice scrambles. There's no question about that. But I think his ability to stand in the pocket, make throws, I just thought that was the difference in the game. And I think on the flip side of that, Alabama's inability to kind of get that same kind of production from the quarterback spot throwing the ball was a detriment in this game.
Look, and Jarrett Stidham was 21 of 28, 237 yards. And how many throwaways did he have, Rodney? A minimum of 4, maybe 5. So he only incompleted probably 2, 3, 4 passes tops. The better quarterback Saturday was Jarrett Stidham, period. And he also, by the way, had 51 yards rushing on 12 carries.
Right. Again, I think overall, it's to me, it's not really just this game. Obviously, we're talking about a trend, and whatever it is, whether it's the offensive line protection, whether it's making the right reads, and Nick Saban said it himself post game. Sometimes we didn't read it correctly, so I assume by that he meant that Jalen Hurts did not make the correct reads on some of those plays. Whether it's opportunities to catch the ball when it's in the air and you not make the play, whatever it is, it's the combination of it all. It's just not been very good this year on a consistent basis for Alabama, the passing game. And I said, Tider Insider TV last Tuesday night, I said it again on Crimson Tide Kickoff TV show on Saturday morning. To me, the difference in this game was going to come down to, could Alabama successfully throw the football on a consistent basis, back the Auburn defense up a little bit, keep them off balance, and score points? You've got to be able to score points, Scott, especially on the road like that. And, when you've got a hurt defense, a defense that's already kind of depleted a little bit, your offense is going to have to pick up some of the slack. And I guess I get a little bit defensive about it seems like the defense at Alabama is held to a completely different standard by the fans and various ones. But, again, they held Auburn to 26 points. I think that's not a bad job given all the circumstances with the injuries, playing on the road against a really good Auburn offense. So, I go back to what I said. I think the defense did not play that badly. Obviously they had some trouble on third downs getting off the field, but I think, their jobs could be made a little bit easier if the offense generated some, consistency, moved the chains, and can convert on third downs.
All right, so final call on the offense. Is this competition open? Is Nick Saban, he surprised us last year when he named a true freshman at quarterback. You and I had questions if he would do that. He did it. He was rewarded. Can he take another step, open up a quarterback competition for the spring? What do you think?
Well, all I know is every time he's been at a crossroads, he's made tough decisions. He did it in 2013. He did something that no one would have expected when he hired Lane Kiffin after they had lost to Auburn down to kick six. He knew changes needed to be made. Every time Nick Saban's kind of needed to make some changes, he's made the tough decisions. This is the crossroads now, as we've already laid it out at that position, but not just that position. There are some other spots as well, by the way, where he's got to evaluate his personnel, may even have to evaluate some of his coaching staff, Scott. And it's not just based on one loss. That's not the point.
No.
The point is for to continue at the same level, to play for championships, to keep the standard up. Sometimes you have to tweak things, you have to make changes, and some of those changes are very difficult. So to your question, I don't think there's a lot of choice but to open the quarterback situation up and give it a fair shot. Again, nobody's predicting that Jalen Hurts would not win that competition. But I think you have to be really fair about it and legitimate about it and give Tua Tagovailoa every opportunity.
I think he will do that. It will be open. Now, he may say it, but really will it be open, for Brian Daboll and Nick Saban and the offensive staff to really see how he goes? I think if you're wise, you do. If not, Rodney, well, let's just go into and this is speculation, but this is part of what we do. If it's not open, what would happen?
I'm not one. I know a lot of people like to speculate like that. That's never really been my forte. I don't feel good about doing that because I really don't know, because that's a hypothetical situation that's really difficult to answer. But I'll say this. I don't think you can afford to lose a quarterback the talent of Tua Tagovailoa. And so is that saying you name him the starter? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying you have to give him the opportunity to compete for the job. And if it's not open and he's not given that opportunity, then could you blame him if he said, no, I need to look elsewhere because obviously I don't fit into your plans.
Yeah.
And I think I'm good enough to play. And who could blame the kid for thinking he's good enough to play? This guy's a tremendous talent. That is not saying that Jalen Hurts doesn't have his own great talents. That has nothing to do with it. We're talking about a quarterback here that, wants to compete for a job. And should he be given that opportunity? And if he's not, then, that decision would be up to him. On the flip side of that, if he won the job, if he, was successful and maybe they felt like the best chance they had to compete at the level they want to compete at is to change the quarterback situation, then you have another thing there you have to deal with. Another issue, I guess you would say, would be, what would Jalen Hurts, how would he fit in? So, again, I know there's a lot of questions, and, speculation certainly is right now is worth nothing, to be honest with you. I think the real key right now is obviously for Alabama is where do they finish up in terms of do they make it to the playoffs, and how do they approach the playoffs? And if they go to a bowl game, then how do they approach that bowl game?
Can you play two quarterbacks?
I don't think so. I thought they could have this year a little bit, but I think moving forward you have to make a decision. I just don't think you can build your program on that on a consistent basis. I do think this year they had an opportunity to play Tua some. Maybe he should have played more in some spots and opportunities that maybe they had, but that he didn't. But I just don't think moving forward, to me, that a two quarterback situation is good. I think you do need to have an established starter and a guy that plays, and he's your guy. So I really don't like that two quarterback system.
Defensively, real quickly, and I know the year's not over, but just looking at season-ending stats, Ronnie Harrison leads in tackles, 68. Second, though, and he had really quietly a really strong year, Raekwon Davis, 59 tackles, 7 tackles for losses, and led the Crimson Tide with 6.5 sacks. He had kind of an All-American year, if you think about it.
He had a really good year. I mean, you're talking about a guy that came out of high school, was extremely raw, was not really highly recruited. Alabama spotted him early, and I think he's going to be a guy that, as he continues to develop, is going to be an outstanding player. And I think as you look at Alabama defensively next year, yeah, there's a lot of question marks. I know everyone says Deron Payne's going to the NFL. I'm not totally sold that that's going to happen. We'll see where he eventually is kind of pegged to go, and then he'll have to make that decision. But if you get Deron Payne back, obviously that's huge. Isaiah Buggs up front, Raekwon Davis, Quentin Williams, LaBryan Ray. I think Fedarian Mathis is a guy who redshirted that all Alabama fans should be keeping an eye on. He's going to be a fantastic talent. And I think some guys that you bring in recruiting will be able to contribute early on the defensive front. So I think next year they've got a chance to be better up front defensively. Obviously, you have to replace Sean Dion Hamilton. You're going to have to replace Rashawn Evans. Outside, you're going to have the fortune of getting Christian Miller and Terrell Lewis back, and Anthony Jennings, and some other young guys. Inside, Dylan Moses is a guy that's going to really compete. Vandarius Cowan, Markel Benton's a guy that redshirted that I think is going to be a fantastic player. And I think some of the young players that they bring in recruiting, and by the way, I probably missed a few off the top of my head, but I do think that some of these young guys they bring in recruiting are going to have an opportunity. In the secondary, you're losing both corners. You're losing probably Minkah Fitzpatrick. We know he's going to probably depart early for the NFL. You may lose Ronnie Harrison. You're going to lose Hootie Jones, who's a senior. So there's a lot of losses in the secondary. I do think they've got some young players that have a chance to step up. You talk about safeties. I really like Deontay Thompson, Xavier McKinney, Daniel Wright. I think those are really some outstanding, talented players. I think at the corner spot, Trevon Diggs has had another year to grow behind Levi Wallace. So we'll see how he kind of develops over the spring practice and so forth. At the other corner, Jared Mayden's playing some. Shy Carter's a guy that could play. Hey, don't forget they lose Tony Brown at that star spot, but sure. Shy Carter could figure in there. I tell you a guy that I really like that they may find a spot for as a contributor is Kareem McDonald, a true freshman who's been redshirted this year. And again, I'm probably forgetting some off the top of my head, but those are some of the guys that really come to mind. And I say that to say this: if you're a young guy out there looking for, to play in the secondary early, then I think you need to make a decision. 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 I think you need then Alabama's probably a good spot for you, because I think at the cornerbacks, you could come in and compete right away, especially if you're one of those early enrollees and get to go through spring practice. So I think recruiting's a key there at the corner spot and in the secondary.
All right, and let's wrap up there. Can Alabama get a secondary haul like they got in the wide receiver haul last year in recruiting, as far as right now, a few weeks before December signing period?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously they have Jalen Armour-Davis out of Mobile St. Paul's is an outstanding player. I think he's a guy that can come in and, may need to get a little bigger, a little more physical, but I think he's a guy that can compete. Savion Smith's a guy I'd really keep an eye on at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. We've talked about him. He was a highly recruited 5-star player that originally signed with LSU. He's a corner that I think has a chance to really come in and compete. Nadab Joseph is a guy they're still recruiting that I think they're still in excellent position with, who's been a safety/cornerback, has a lot of great length, tremendous athlete who could compete. And the question is, now you need a couple more. Who might those be? I think guys like Tyson Campbell at American Heritage High School in Plantation, Florida, maybe the best corner in the country, one of the top 2 or 3. He would be a pivotal recruit if Alabama could get him. Maybe another guy would be Josh Jobe, who's committed to Miami. He's another tremendous talent as a cornerback. He's a Cheshire Academy up in Connecticut, but originally from Miami. So guys like that, I think, are going to be key to this class, Scott. We'll see how it all unfolds, but I do think defensive line and I do think linebacker, we're getting some more talented linebackers, are always important. And in the secondary, I think those are really some key spots, on that defensive side. I think that's really where Alabama, has to pick up its talent levels on the defensive side of the ball, continue to kind of replace some of the guys that you've lost over the last couple of years and that you're going to lose this year.
We'll wrap it up there. We'll have more coming in the coming days. For Rodney Orr, this is Scott Griffith saying so long. Tide and Tiger, subscribe at YouTube, also here at Podbean. And don't forget about TiderInsider.com, only $48 a year to get all the inside information, the message forums, and much more from there. For Rodney Orr, Scott Griffith saying so long. Thanks for listening to Tide and Tiger.